The standard gymnastiorka, what every Soviet soldier wore. The foundation of the Soviet sniper's kit was the same thing every Red Army soldier wore. The gymnastiorka was a collarless pullover shirt in khaki or olive green, worn with matching trousers, a belt, and a palatka side cap or a steel helmet depending on the situation. It was simple, cheap to produce, and designed for a country that needed to clothe millions of men quickly. For a sniper, this uniform had obvious problems. Khaki and olive green blended reasonably well into grass and summer foliage, but the cut was loose and shapeless in ways that did not break up the human outline effectively. Buttons caught light. The silhouette of a man lying in a field was still recognizable as a man lying in a field. Soviet sniper doctrine addressed this directly, but not by issuing better uniforms. It addressed it by training snipers to solve the problem themselves. Concealment was taught as a fundamental skill. Snipers learned to use natural materials, grass, branches, mud, to supplement whatever they were wearing. The uniform was the starting point, not the solution. The amoeba camouflage suit, the first dedicated piece. By the late 1930s, the Red Army had developed a camouflage suit that predated similar designs in most other countries. It was called the amoeba pattern for the irregular, blotchy shapes printed on it, brown and green patches on a lighter background that broke up the human outline reasonably well against summer vegetation. The suit came in two pieces, a jacket and trousers worn over the standard uniform. It was issued selectively, primarily to scouts and snipers, and never reached the full infantry in significant quantities. Production was limited, and distribution was uneven, which meant that whether a sniper received one depended heavily on where they were stationed and what their unit had access to. Those who had the amoeba suit used it consistently through the summer campaigns. Those who did not improvised, which the Soviet system accepted as normal. The emphasis on individual skill over standardized equipment ran through Soviet military thinking at every level. The Winter War. Cold is the first real test. The Winter War against Finland. From November 1939 to March 1940, was the first major test of Soviet field gear in extreme cold, and it went badly in almost every way. Soviet troops were poorly equipped for the conditions. Standard wool uniforms that worked reasonably well in autumn temperatures became dangerously inadequate at -20 or -30 degrees Celsius. Finnish snipers fighting in white camouflage against snow were extremely hard to spot. Soviet soldiers in standard khaki were not. The lesson was immediate and painful, and the Red Army drew conclusions from it that shaped everything that followed. The white winter suit was not new. It had existed in various forms for years, but the Winter War demonstrated that it was not optional in those conditions, and the priority given to winter camouflage production increased significantly in the years before Germany invaded in 1941. The white suit, simple, effective, everywhere. The white winter camouflage suit became the most recognized piece of Soviet sniper kit during the war. It was not complicated. A loose two-piece coverall in white cotton or linen, worn over the standard uniform and all other equipment. Sometimes it had a hood, often it did not. The quality varied depending on when and where it was produced. What it did was obvious. Against snow, a soldier in white became extremely difficult to see at any distance. Soviet snipers operating in winter conditions used the white suit as their primary concealment tool, and their results made the case for it clearly. The suit was cheap to produce, fast to put on, and required no special training to use. Those qualities mattered enormously in a military system that needed to equip and deploy huge numbers of people quickly. The suit had a straightforward limitation. It worked in snow and stopped working the moment the ground was no longer white. Transitional seasons, the mud and slush of early spring and late autumn, were the hardest periods. Snipers in those conditions fell back on the standard uniform and whatever natural material they could add to it. The sniper's veil and face covering. Soviet sniper training put specific emphasis on the face and hands as the most visible parts of a concealed shooter. A soldier lying still in vegetation is hard to see until sunlight catches their skin. Soviet snipers were taught to cover the face with netting, cloth, or mud, and to keep the hands covered or darkened during operations. The sniper's veil was a piece of open-weave mesh worn over the head and face, large enough to drape over the shoulders and break up the head's distinctive shape from a distance. It was not always issued formally. Many snipers made their own from whatever netting or fabric was available. The principle was consistent even when the equipment was not. Gloves were worn in cold weather as standard practice and served double duty as concealment. In warmer months, snipers wrapped their hands or darkened them with dirt. The attention to these small details was part of what Soviet sniper training treated as the difference between a shooter who survived and one who did not. Women, snipers, and uniform adaptation. The Soviet Union deployed women in combat roles that no other major military did at the time, and the sniper program was one of the most significant examples. The Central Women's School of Sniper Training, established in 1943, trained over 1,000 female snipers during the war, many of whom compiled significant records. Women snipers wore the same basic uniform as their male counterparts: the gymnastiorka, the standard trousers, the pilatka, the white winter suit in cold weather. There was no dedicated female uniform for combat roles. The standard kit was adapted to fit, often by the soldiers themselves, and the same improvised concealment techniques applied equally. What differed was the specific emphasis in training. Women's sniper schools placed heavy weight on fieldcraft, the ability to move, hide, and wait without being detected, as a complement to marksmanship. The uniform supported that doctrine through concealment rather than through any specific design feature. Stalingrad, urban warfare, and uniform realities. The Battle of Stalingrad, from late 1942 through early 1943, created sniper conditions unlike anything else in the war. The fighting was in buildings, basements, and rubble fields, where the distances were sometimes measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. Standard camouflage was largely irrelevant in these conditions. Snipers at Stalingrad wore whatever they had, often the standard uniform with civilian items mixed in, and relied on the rubble itself for cover rather than any clothing system. Dust-covered gray was natural camouflage in a city that had been bombed flat. The lesson Stalingrad reinforced was the same one Soviet doctrine had always held. No uniform solves the problem. The sniper solves the problem. The uniform is a tool, not the answer. The KZS suit, camouflage, catches up. By 1943, the Red Army was producing a more developed camouflage suit designated the KZS. It used the same general principle as the earlier amoeba pattern, but with a more refined print and better construction. The two-piece design covered the full body, included a hood, and was cut loosely enough to go over the standard uniform and equipment without restricting movement. The KZS saw wider distribution than earlier camouflage had. Sniper units were prioritized, but by this point in the war, the Soviet logistical system had recovered enough from the catastrophic losses of 1941 and 1942 to supply specialist equipment more consistently. Snipers who received the KZS suit generally used it as their primary summer camouflage, reserving the amoeba pattern for when the KZS was unavailable. The pattern performed well in forests and against mixed vegetation. In open steppe or urban environments, its value was more limited, and snipers continued to supplement it with natural materials as they had always done: Lend-Lease and foreign equipment. American and British supplies reaching the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease included clothing and personal equipment, alongside vehicles and weapons. American wool uniforms, boots, and jackets reached Soviet troops in varying quantities and were worn in the field alongside standard Soviet issue. For snipers specifically, the practical effect was that the quality of base layer clothing improved in units that received Lend-Lease supplies. American boots in particular were regarded as significantly better than standard Soviet footwear. Better boots meant snipers could hold positions in cold and wet conditions longer before physical discomfort forced movement, and forced movement was one of the most common causes of a sniper being spotted. The camouflage and concealment system remained Soviet in design and doctrine throughout. Lend-Lease improved the foundation, but did not change the approach. Dedicated sniper distinctions. Soviet snipers who qualified through the formal certification system wore a badge on their uniform indicating their status. The sniper badge was a small metal pin worn on the chest, awarded after passing a qualification course with specific score requirements. Higher grades of sniper qualification carried their own badges. These distinctions mattered within the Soviet system. A certified sniper received priority access to the better rifles, specifically the Mosin Nagant with the PU or PE scope fitted, and was assigned to sniper missions rather than general infantry duties. The badge was not camouflage. It was rank of a specific kind, recognition of a specific skill. By the late war, the most experienced Soviet snipers had accumulated records that made them well known within their units, and sometimes beyond. They received better equipment, more autonomy over their assignments, and in some cases became instructors at sniper schools while the war was still ongoing. The uniform they wore remained essentially the same as every other soldier's. What set them apart was what they could do in it.